Hi, I've got to share with you a little pattern to my best moments. They've all been unpredictable, unplanned, and completely out of the blue. So they were unforeseen, but they've left a lasting impression. Probably most memorable moments. Whether it was a run in with an old friend somewhere in a foreign land, whether it was finding an affordable food joint, or even my academic scholarship, they've all come out of the blue. Something like this happened recently when I was recording the program with Professor Nikolai Petrovsky. Our topic was vaccines and vaccinations, and I invited Dr. Nikolai Petrovsky to talk about his entry into the vaccine research or biomedical research after having been trained as a medical doctor, more specifically endocrinologist. So we realized that we went on and on for 30-35 minutes and probably discussed things that were more closer to us. For example, what it takes for an individual to excel in this field of biomedical researcher, whether it's better to stay in a clinical practice than try your luck in medical research. What is the environment like? What are the expectations? What are the kind of people that you're going to deal with? And most importantly, who is a champion researcher? What is the single biggest characteristic that, let's say, a Nobel laureate would have? How to cope with failure? We completely enjoyed this program. This discussion was not planned. We thought that the vaccines and vaccinations can wait for a later time. I'm even wondering that I should stop announcing the Sunday schedule ahead of time. Well, you decide when you take a look at our program this Sunday. You're a diabetologist and endocrinologist by profession, but has a long history of association with vaccine research, its development. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey through this field, because there are, I'm sure, many young folks out there watching. How did you end up, and what is the inspiration that kept you going in this field for so long?
Well, thanks for the question. By training, I initially trained in medicine, but always had a passion for research. And many years ago, I aspired to become an immunologist. That was an area that I thought in the 1980s and 1990s when I was training was a super exciting area. A lot of Nobel Prizes had been won in the area. And there were lots of scientific advances being made in the area of immunology. So I ended up doing a PhD in immunology. And my PhD actually was focused, because by that time I'd trained clinically as an endocrinologist. I actually decided to do a project on type 1 diabetes, which is an endocrine disease, so it's managed by endocrinologists. But the cause of the disease is actually immune attack of the beta cells. So it's a mixture of immunology and endocrinology. And so I thought that was the perfect field to allow me to transition over to do research immunology. And so that was quite challenging, because to this day, we don't still fully understand why the immune system dysfunctions and causes type 1 diabetes. Why does the immune system attack the islet beta cells? Let alone, what I was trying to do is not only work out, well, why is that happening? Which, as I say, to this day, still we don't fully understand. But in fact, to go one step further and say, can we stop this? Can we modulate the immune system? Can we educate it, or in some way stop it attacking the beta cells? And so, my project was initially very focused around the idea, can we develop a vaccine to prevent or to treat type 1 diabetes? Now,
Right.
that was a futuristic project, very ambitious project, because, as I say, fast forward 30 years, we still are not there. We still don't understand type 1 diabetes, what causes it, and we certainly don't have a cure for type 1 diabetes. So, but I learned a lot in, doing that PhD about how the human immune system does work. And out of that I realized that although it might be premature to work on or to think we could develop a type 1 diabetes vaccine based on the information we have, I still believe it will be it will be achieved in the future. But right here and now, we just still don't have enough knowledge. What I realized is, though, I could use that knowledge that I'd acquired during my PhD to actually make vaccines for much easier problems where we have already good understanding. And of course, we already had quite a number of vaccines against infectious disease. Some of them dating back 200 years to
Yes.
Louis Pasteur. So I then refocused a little. I've never given up on the idea of developing a type 1 diabetes vaccine, but I refocused it because, again, in research, you have to be successful, because research, you have to attract funding, and no one is going to give you funding if you spend 20 years chasing something and never actually getting to the destination. So what you have to do is break it down and say, all right, I'll come back to that. It's too big a problem. What's a problem I can solve that, I'll then attract additional support and funding, and progressively work towards that ultimate goal. And so I shifted focus somewhat and started to work in infectious disease vaccines. And in fact, we've been extremely successful in that area, because, as I say, it's difficult, but it's not impossible, because there are already examples. And then more recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, have been pushing back into these more difficult areas like cancer vaccines, allergy vaccines, Alzheimer's disease vaccines. Currently, still not a type 1 diabetes vaccine. That's, I think, going to be the hardest of all. But I think we're now confident enough to say, yes, we can develop successful vaccines against not just infectious disease, but some of these other chronic diseases. Maybe one day, hopefully, type 1 diabetes will be on that list.
Dr. Petrovsky, the resource limitation will always be there. And there are certainly so many sectors within an economy. And then once you get to the health sector specifically, obviously there are policy priorities and other competing interests. For any young graduate, whether it's an allied health professional or it's a medical graduate, how is the outlook of this field of, say, vaccine research and development?
It's pretty tough. It's a
Right.
highly competitive environment out there,
Right.
and the amount of money available for vaccine research is not so great. And one of the
Right.
reasons for that is that you're trying to prevent diseases. And I think this will resonate with you and anyone from public health, is that it's much harder to get the public, and also the government, to give you money to prevent a disease that they don't have. Whereas if someone has a disease, or
Right.
someone has someone in the family with a disease like cancer, they're ready to give over large amounts of money because they have a problem and they want it solved.
Right. Right.
And so, if I was talking to a young researcher, I would say, look, you need to think carefully about what your strategy is going to be. Don't think you're going to be showered with money. Maybe if there's a pandemic, there'll be a couple of years of, where people will shovel money at you, but it will rapidly
Diverted,
dry up, as we've
diverted from
seen
other
with COVID.
sectors.
Sorry?
That money would also be diverted from other sectors, from other
Yeah,
areas.
temporarily. During COVID, money was diverted from cancer research into COVID vaccine research, but then very rapidly switches back. So it's not sustainable. So, you know, again, it's not to say don't not do vaccine research. That wouldn't be my advice. I think if you're passionate about it, definitely do vaccine, but go into it fully appreciating the challenges that you're going to face, and a key one being the challenge of getting research funding, consistent research funding, because it takes a long time to develop a vaccine, and research funding expects quick results. Like in Australia, like research grants are typically 3 years. In the US, they between 3 and 5 years. But it takes 20 to 30 years to make a medical breakthrough, whether it's a new drug or it's a new vaccine or a new discovery. Anyone will tell you that it's not something that happens overnight. So you have to have a game plan. How am I going to consistently get grant after grant after grant, knowing that it might be 5 or 10 grants before I actually hopefully achieve my destination. So you have to break it down and work out what are the milestones, what are the deliverables, how am I going to show that I'm actually getting somewhere. Because you're not going to be, promising at the beginning of a 3-year grant to, say, cure type 1 diabetes, and at the end of 3 years you've cured it. It simply isn't realistic. And anyone who gave me a grant saying that, I would just say, you're in the wrong field. That doesn't show any reality. But if someone says, look, I can do this research into an aspect of type 1 diabetes, and I think that will be an important stepping stone on the way to a cure for type 1 diabetes in, much longer period of time, then I think, okay, that's realistic. Okay. And I think what they're doing is meaningful. So being over ambitious, particularly in your grants, doesn't impress. You need to be realistic, but at the same time demonstrate the importance of what you're doing. So it's challenging, but I've survived in that field, and I've been funded continuously for the last 30 years or so. So it's not impossible, but I do know that there are a lot of my colleagues who complain bitterly about the lack of support and funding.
It's also so much in contrast with the other sorts of research, say observational studies, where you can just take some measurements from patients or volunteers, and then get your appetite for research well satisfied by publishing a paper. For the vaccine research, you need very sophisticated labs, the infrastructure, and I don't think that there are many out there. Maybe with little experience that I have, my advice, because I see so many folks in biotechnology sector coming up, there's hundreds, probably thousands of graduates every year globally in the biotech sector. Maybe start with identifying the labs, which are probably going to be the first, at least help them accomplish the first condition to arrive at an infrastructure where they are likely to progress, rather than running around after some maybe human resources or some additional degrees.
No, absolutely. I think, if you're young and you want to break into a field, look for the best role models, like the people who have been successful, and contact them, and potentially join and spend time in their group, and absorb all of their knowledge. It definitely is the way to go, because as you say, you really have to benchmark yourself from the very best. It's no good to say, I just want to do this and it's going to be a hobby, or
Certainly not.
and so you have to be competitive, and you're not competing with the people at the bottom. You're competing with Nobel laureates, for God's sake. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're your competitors, and they've already won a Nobel Prize. But that's who you have to beat to get the money, to get the grants, to get the publications. You're not. Again, it's a highly competitive area. I mean, if you enjoy that, it's great. If you don't like competition and you think it should be a level playing field and everyone should get a share of the money, that's not science. Go to biotechnology and get a job. I mean, to
Absolutely.
do academic scientific research, it's always going to be highly competitive, and it has to be, because it has to
Absolutely.
select the very best, because there just isn't enough money and resources, unfortunately, to fund everybody. And so, it's probably one of the most intensely competitive areas, apart from professional sport. But maybe it's even more competitive than professional sport in terms of academic science. So it's a really tough. You got to have a thick skin, be confident, and you have to have very good discipline and perseverance. Because even Nobel laureates get their grants rejected. In fact, I know Barry Marshall, who had got a Nobel Prize for discovering Heliobacter, and he was telling me, like, ever since he's got the Nobel Prize, like, wherever he goes, everyone makes a big fuss, but he submits all these grants and they all get rejected. Do you know what I mean? Like, so you know that
I
that's
agree.
the environment we're in. People get surprised by hearing that. Rolf Zinkenagel, again, a Nobel laureate, told me the same thing. It's because, yeah, science is you know at the end, it's for 99% of scientists, you have to compete and continue to compete, really, for your whole career. It's not like it's given to you on a plate.
The reason I was tempted to have this discussion, it's almost like rather than two parts, it's a three-part now, a series. So I was tempted because I related your training, professional training from diabetologist, where you were trained, or even as a medical professional, you were trained to save an individual life, to switching to a profession or a field where the potential to save lives runs in hundreds, sometimes thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. So it was never going to be easy. One can never discount the sensitivity of the field. We have, hopefully, in some future programs, we will touch upon the regulatory regime that really grills even after a very successful, apparently successful or promising results that you show in your lab results and your clinical trials. That is certainly, that gives me shudders even now to think about, compared to maybe a competitive sports where the decisions are made there and then fans and players can go back. Whether they've won or lost is
Yeah.
declared, but that is a grueling process of a regulatory oversight that really is the premise of the entire process, is that you're claiming that your product is saving lives. So for any youngster, I think once you're starting from that level, the bar is already ultra high compared to any other profession.
No, and I think it's an interesting point you make about initially working as a doctor, where you're trying to save one life at a time, and then looking at science and thinking, potentially one breakthrough and I can save 100,000 or 1 million lives. And surely that the return on investment of, like, of my time, because we all have a limited lifespan, to do good. And you think, but if I do research, like, if I do medicine, it's like a guarantee. If I see 20 people a day, I'm helping 20 people a day, which means over a year I'm helping thousands of people, and so on. So you can multiply that out. uh, and it's certain, like, because you just have to be a good doctor, and you're going to help people. And then you think, if I do research, you know, and I have a breakthrough, you know, overnight I might help millions of people. And that's more than I could ever help as a doctor. But it's high risk because there's no certainty now that I'll help anyone. Because if my research, you know, doesn't reach a destination, or I went down the wrong path, you know, arguably I would have been better off, you know, staying as a doctor and seeing patients. And and I think people's personality is different. And I talk to my medical colleagues who do, you know, see patients, and we talk about these things. And you can see that the more conservative and the ones that are not risk takers
Right.
are the ones who are staying in, you know, in medicine, because that's where they think, you know, there's more certainty around it, both income wise and also
Right.
in terms of actually doing good for patients. But, you know, those of us who, again, maybe are more compelled and believe we can actually do it, like we can actually contribute, are the ones who then get drawn over more onto the research side, because we can just see that enormous power to have tremendous impact if we can deliver. So I think that different personalities will be drawn into the two sort of avenues of being a doctor versus doing medical research. And some do both, of course. Some are sort of sit on the fence. And again, some of my colleagues would fit into that category, where they'll do a bit of research, but mainly work clinically, and so that way they sort of. And I'm probably in that category to a degree, or I was. I mean, I'm now not. I'm now more focused on the research, but till recently, of course, I was actually doing clinical medicine as my main job, and the research was actually, on the side.
I think both professions, whether you're practicing medicine or you're doing an academic research, uh, even outside lab, with hundreds of possible volunteers or patients to recruit, what drives, at least what drove me, was this impact thing, to come across vast number of people in the community that I grew up in, and also the medical profession, at least from where I graduated in Pakistan, seemed to be, maybe like all other professions, had some sort of a generational footprint, that if your forefathers or your parents, grandparents had graduated in medicine or dentistry, and over the years, over the decades, they had established good practices, maybe it is more likely that as a new graduate you will join what they have already established. I certainly didn't have that luxury, so what motivated me was the shot in the arm that I wanted to get through talking to public, and communicating more to the society in general. I'm just sharing what I thought, what made me come to the this research and public health side after graduating in dentistry. Any concluding thoughts on this aspect? Fantastic discussion, and always, as I say, that the unplanned discussions and meetings are the best ones. So really enjoyed discussing it.
Look, I think anyone contemplating a medical research career, I mean, the best thing is to talk to lots of people, as many as possible in the field, and get their thoughts. You can't get too many perspectives, and absorb what they say, and take their advice, because, you're talking to people who've been in the field often a long time, have seen, different stories play out. So, yeah, I think you can't talk to too many, too many people in the field itself to, and then decide your own personality. Like, is your personality going to suit such a career? And ask people, do you think my personality, as you see me, do you think I'm the sort of person who will succeed? And you may get told no, in which case you should think about that seriously. Doesn't mean no,
Mhm.
doesn't mean impossible. But when someone says no, you should reflect on it and think, well, why are they saying no? Are they saying no to protect me, or are they saying no because they just don't think I've got the stamina, but I know I have. Like, sometimes you may not manifest it. I've seen people who look very sort of humble and, you think, oh, they're not tough inside. But sometimes they turn out to be the toughest people, and some are,
Absolutely.
But what you often doing, and this is true in job interviews as well, you're trying to, dig and find the real person, and that's not as easy as it sounds.
No, no, not at all.
Because everyone has a persona that is sort of like a veneer on top. But ultimately, what you want to discover when you're doing a job interview is what's the real person inside, like what's their motivation, their driver, their commitment, and that's not always measurable. Just from looking at someone, you have to dig.
One of the phenomenon they've described in the medical research, risk aversion, may be true here. People who would like to, and to be honest, I recollected what I went through. But if somebody asks me, if a medical graduate or a dental graduate asks me today if he should follow what I did, if somebody views this conversation online and asks me that, okay, he's interested, I'm rather more likely to say no. Stay in the clinic setting, be safe, be secure,
Yeah, no,
and no need to
exactly. I
expect
mean, I
anything.
mean, and but that's almost like no as a challenge. So in other words, you're saying, when they
True,
ask you, you
that's
say
true.
no, and then but
That's
then if
true.
they're really motivated, they'll push through that and say, I'm still going to do it. Like, this is why. So sometimes no is actually a test. It's
It
not
fires
a,
you up.
it's not a final
That's right.
outcome.
That's right.
Same with grants, of course. Like, just because
Right.
a grant gets a no doesn't mean you shouldn't keep resubmitting it and pushing and arguing why it should be a yes. And often, if you do that, you will ultimately get a yes. So again, it's about perseverance, and you have to be the sort of person who
That's the
who
word.
doesn't get upset when you get the first rejection and cry yourself to sleep and feel dreadful about it. You have to be the sort of person who gets a rejection, and it makes you even tougher and more determined that you're going to. So that yeah, it's very much about your personality and your strength. And I would say, if yeah, you have to be tough to survive in science. There's no question. You have to have a real belief and an inner strength.
Unbelievable what you've just described, because the word that I was also arriving at was perseverance, where this entire thing probably stops for all of us as a person, I think folks, youngsters, we've dedicated 30, 35 minutes of Professor Nick's time today, to really open up this field of medical research, clinical research, laboratory research, biomedical research for you. So if you feel, if this discussion fires you up and makes you more persevere for a longer haul, then you're probably good to go for the academic research. Good luck with that. Dr. Nikolai, thank you very much. And